Imagine Ebola and AIDS are man-made. Is that a question or a statement? Is it correct? Or is this just one of those far-out right-wing or left-wing conspiracies? Well, today's guest is Dr. Leonard Horowitz.
Hi, John.
It's nice to have you on the show. And we're going to discuss, I guess, today whether there is some legitimacy to this or whether this is somewhat of the fairy tale range of some type of CIA conspiracy for the X-Files.
Right. I'm a major cult leader right now for the mad people who believe the AIDS epidemic is man-made.
Correct, exactly. Now, what I'd like to address first is, could you give us some of your background on how you got into this? Because, of course, you didn't start off believing or finding that this was a possibility of being man-made. You started as a researcher, right, a medical researcher, I'm correct?
Exactly.
Okay.
How I began investigating the origins of AIDS and Ebola was by way of the Florida dental AIDS tragedy. You remember the case of the Florida dentist that infected his patients with the AIDS virus. Well, I became the chief investigator of the murder theory in that case. And I published 3 scientific reports after studying that case for 3 years. I concluded that it was an intentional transmission. And that I wrote a book, my 9th book, which was called Deadly Innocence, and it was a summary of the case, and that what I wrote in there was that the dentist was angry, not for the reasons why the government allowed the media to tell us that it was angry. They said that it was because of these people homophobic society. He was angry at homophobic society. It was because it wouldn't be until teenagers and grandmothers get this disease, they told us, that the government would finally do something. That wasn't really it at all. That was partly true, but the real motive, what made Dr. Acker really angry, was the fact that he believed that he was dying from a virus that the government had created. Yes.
Now, why was that his belief?
Well, that's what was most extraordinary. I finished the investigation with the documents that this scientifically trained dentist held in his possession. And that was the most extraordinary, most disturbing document I'd ever seen in my life. That was a 1970 Department of Defense appropriations request for $10 million for a 5-year study to develop immune system ravaging viruses for germ warfare. In fact, it states right in there that it was the National Academy of Sciences, National Research Council, that informed the Department of Defense that they not only could, for $2 million a year over 5 years, they could develop immune system destroying viruses and microorganisms for germ warfare, but they would help to do it. And interestingly enough, local news is that the fellow who was principally in charge of that committee was just recently named the president of Caltech. His name is David Baltimore. So for all the folks that want to think about some current events and look at how it relates back to ancient history now, I guess back to the 1960s.
So he's the president of and he also was one of the early researchers in regards to creating man-made viruses. That's nice to know.
That's nice to know, that's right. And
now,
in fact, he wants to make Pasadena area a corridor for biotechnology now. So, it might behoove some people who have an interest to either move out of Pasadena or contact your governor to protest the making of Caltech's president, David Baltimore.
Now, here's an interesting question, because there are a number of people who have stated, the Birch Society, for example, had put out a article to some of their members stating that the Gulf War disease is a farce, and also it stated that memo you quoted, that the money was never appropriated and that it was not intended that way. Now, can you tell me, was it appropriated? Do we have any factual documentation? And do we have anything to show, or is it classified exactly whether they were successful with the 5-year study?
Yes, it was appropriated, and I reprint in the book Emerging Viruses, AIDS and Ebola, which is my new book. It's a whole expose on the origins of AIDS and Ebola, the man-made. They're undoubtedly laboratory creations. The book goes into who made these types of viruses, when they made them, how they made them virtually every step of the way, and then I show you the contracts to prove it. $2 million a year were given to another California organization called Litton Industries.
Oh, Litton, okay.
Okay, they had a medical subsidiary called Litton Bionetics, and they got the money. And what they did with the money was they produced, under the direction of Dr. Robert Gallo, the fellow who allegedly discovered the AIDS virus in 1984, then got involved in the French-American AIDS fracas. You remember that whole story. Well, it was, this is now the 4th time, actually Dr. Gallo apparently is being reevaluated and investigated for more fraud. This is about the 5th time in 3 decades. But ultimately, I show you the contract. It was National Institute of Health contract number 712025. It was called Investigation of Viral Carcinogenesis in Primates. That's the investigation of cancer production by virus infection in monkeys and humans. And it started on February 12, 1962, where Bionetics began to research these types of immune system ravaging virus recombinants. What they did is they took, with Gallo, he joined them in 68.
Okay.
They took monkey viruses that many believe could cause cancer.
Right.
And they recombined them with virtually every animal cancer virus known, including their favorite ones were feline leukemia, caused cat leukemia, virus RNA, and a whole laundry list of symptoms virtually identical to what AIDS patients suffer from.
Okay.
Another favorite was Dr. Peter Duesberg's area of expertise, chicken leukemia sarcoma virus, RNA.
So he did research in the chicken leukemia.
Yes, and again in the book, Emerging Viruses, AIDS and Ebola, I show you that Duesberg was intimately working with these people, Gallo, and the National Cancer Institute researchers who were doing this. And again, one of the many smoking guns. I mean, notice I've said like leukemia, lymphoma, sarcoma.
Right.
Now, that's one of the many smoking guns in the book because the immune suppression, specific cancer complex that these people were studying, that they spent most of their time and money studying during this highly funded, largely secret special virus cancer program, was in fact the immune suppression, leukemia, lymphoma, sarcoma, cancer complex that never existed on planet Earth before 1978, that is in humans, before 1978, with the onset of the first AIDS cases. That is precisely what these people were doing, modifying these viruses, and then to get them to jump species from monkeys or cats or chickens to humans, what they did is they cultured it in human white blood cells.
And made it grow.
Exactly. And then other studies, they used fetal tissue cells in culture.
So then they ended up having to jump species then.
And that's how they got to jump species. And then they published this. So what I did
They published the report on it.
Yes.
Boy, they are really bold, aren't they?
Well, they did not know. I mean, in my opinion, that's one of the few things that gets Robert Gallo off the hook. But the fact is he self-incriminated. I mean, he was one of the principals that alleged that it was an African green monkey that bit a man or was eaten by a man, that somehow Portuguese seamen transferred this type of virus to Japan some 500 years ago. I mean, all of this, and then I show you all of the subsequent alleged bona fide research in this area and comments are a cover-up, and that therefore they have self-incriminated. And I show you the documents wherein they have obviously self-incriminated.
Like Duesberg's doing work in regard to this field. So when he makes the thesis, or of course there's several books written with him, and Rapport's written one who I respect, but he's also in that camp somewhat, and so is Dr. Yamyanis, who's very expert in fluoride. However, they all quote much of what Duesberg says, that the virus existed prior to the 1970s or 1960s.
No evidence, documented, scientifically confirmed evidence to say that.
And they said they found certain, and I'll get into certain autopsies they performed where they said they supposedly found an HIV strand of virus, and that they found, now I think if I'm correct, they may have said AIDS and not HIV, because AIDS could have existed before that time, because isn't that just a syndrome? Just like chronic fatigue. So someone could have AIDS, acquire immune deficiency syndrome, but not have a virus because their immune system's depressed.
That's a possibility.
Right, but we're talking about an actual infective agent now.
That
so there's
causes this, right.
HIV documented cases that you know of prior to that time, because that's their whole contention. There are documented cases. There are
not. It's been scientifically confirmed. In fact, the definitive textbook in the whole field is by Jay Levy, and the section on this, the evolution of these types of viruses, is by the world's top researcher. His name is Gerald Myers, top government analyst, an analyst of DNA sequencing from Los Alamos. And he says very clearly, the first isolated strain of HIV is 1976. And his thesis is that by 1975, you had what he called the Big Bang. Several different subtypes of AIDS around the planet. And all the other ones, the earlier ones, there's only one outstanding that I reconcile in my book, Emerging Viruses, AIDS and Ebola, is the 1968 case of Robert R., who was the black teenager from St. Louis who died of AIDS-like symptoms. But when they did an analysis, and I spoke to the authors of this report, it was an AIDS-like virus. It wasn't HIV.
Oh, so it wasn't HIV strain.
It was a progenitor, a relative, an earlier relative, very clearly. And what I show you is that's precisely what was going on at the time. I take the development of these types of progenitors back to 1965, and I show you how the vaccine that most plausibly brought AIDS to the world was the 1974 experimental hepatitis B vaccine that Saul Krugman began in 1965 to do pilot studies to begin to develop. And they started by inoculating Willowbrook State School mentally retarded children with hepatitis B viruses as early as 1965. And then subsequently, after 5 years in 1970, they turned this project over to Maurice Hilleman, who President Clinton has just awarded the Sabin Medal of Honor for his service to American military and medicine. And you better believe it's intelligence service as well.
I was going to say the same thing.
Yeah, that's right. So, but anyway, Hilleman takes this project over in 1971, and I have the contracts again published in the book. So they then take this virus, the hepatitis B viruses, and they need to expand it to include 200,000 human doses that I show you. They developed this vaccine in contaminated chimpanzees and rhesus monkeys. And everyone who in AIDS research will tell you that the closest thing going to the human AIDS virus is the simian immunodeficiency virus from the chimpanzee.
Polio vaccines were contaminated. They know that. That was documented.
Exactly. And they were contaminated with monkey viruses because the vaccines are grown on monkey kidney tissues. And in fact, the horrifying reality is, in that regard, in the polio regard, is today's oral polio vaccine that the government says is so safe and effective. Today's vaccines are still littered with monkey virus contaminants to the tune of as many as 100 SV40s monkey virus contaminants per dose that the FDA must turn a blind eye to because their hands are tied by proprietary laws and non-disclosure agreements placed upon them by the pharmaceutical industry.
So they can't look into the virus, the vaccine.
Exactly. They're so muzzled by the drug makers that they can't even tell health scientists what the true risks of these vaccines are.
Well, they know that every single case of polio since 1977, this is U.S. News and Weekly Report, is also in JAMA, has been caused by the polio vaccine. That's documented.
For 17 years.
Salk said that in a court trial. Jonas Salk. He said because the live virus is causing every case of polio.
Exactly.
So you're right. We're talking about that. Now, getting back to Duisburg again, I guess because there's so many people that are believing the fundamental belief that HIV does not cause AIDS. This is a mass mean of gathering a lot of money from people taking AZT. Therefore, it's a fraud. These things are not what's causing people to die. It's actual drugs and so forth.
Right.
But my contention and what I'm understanding is that that's not the whole picture. AZT may be something that will cause early death, but the HIV virus is a reality then as far as being a factor.
Absolutely. And again, in the book Emerging Viruses, AIDS and Ebola, I show you not only Duisburg's contracts, what Gallo and Bionetics researchers were doing in monkeys, Duisburg was doing in chickens.
So he knew.
Under the same special project. Not only that, I show you a conversation between Duisburg and Gallo, wherein Gallo basically asked the same question to Duisburg in the early 1970s. He says, Peter, you know, if we take these type C type cancer viruses, which are RNA retroviruses, okay, just like the AIDS virus, and AIDS virus goes through what's called a type C morphogenesis, a developmental stage, just like these viruses that they were using. And he says to Duisburg, do you think we can get these to cause cancer? Do you think these would cause cancer in humans? Duisburg says, quote, that's absolutely right, end quote. Now
he says it doesn't cause cancer.
Since 1980, 87, 88, he starts going off. Now, I explain this.
Okay.
It's standard disinformation.
Okay.
In my opinion, Duisburg is a disinformation artist.
Right.
Everybody who says, oh, the poor guy is starving to death, you know, they've been ostracized by the medical and scientific community. Well, my answer to that is, have you ever been to Peter Duisburg's house? Have you ever seen his bank accounts? How do you know that for sure? I don't know that. You don't know that.
Right.
And the bottom line is, what he's doing is absolutely consistent with counterintelligence propaganda and follows the Hegelian manner, which is standard. It's where you present a thesis, you follow with an antithesis, and you have what's called synthesis. Correct. Gallo presents the thesis, HIV is the only thing that causes AIDS, lifestyle risks, drug use, nothing else. Get the virus, you're dead. That's the thesis. That's not right either. Duisburg says antithesis. No, the virus has nothing to do with HIV. It's lifestyle risks. It's anal sex. It's amyl nitrate. It's AZT, DDI, 3DC.
Malnutrition.
Malnutrition, exactly. So that is true. It's 80% true. But here's what Duisberg doesn't tell you. And as a result of the thesis antithesis, you get what's called synthesis. You get mass confusion. People have no idea what to believe. The debate argument continues.
Correct.
People lose patience. They tune out. They get tired.
Right.
And the government keeps doing this. Perpetrates this hoax. And the AIDS industry continues. Now, here is what Duisberg is not telling you. And Gallo won't talk about it either. You see, as that virus buds off the cell, the T cells, it takes with it a little piece of the cell protein. So now you have what's called an antigenic complex. That's a foreign complex composed of a virus particle with a cell protein that now the body, the immune system, recognizes as foreign. And so the antibody response that Duisberg and all of his followers say is, quote, protective antibodies or neutralizing antibodies are anything but. They are actually part of an autoimmune disease that reduces the immunity, leaves people susceptible to the opportunistic infections as well as the cancers.
I see.
And it is specifically the leukemia, lymphoma, sarcoma, cancers that this type of virus creates, exactly like the viruses that they were creating in their labs between 1967, 68, 69, 70, 71.
Now, has Duisberg ever been asked about this, I guess you'd say up front in any type of meeting, since obviously this is common knowledge now, and have you tried to talk to him personally, I guess?
Well, A, it's not common knowledge. B, I'm not interested in calling Duisberg. I'm happy to debate him, but I will debate him. I will debate Gallo. I've challenged Duisberg, Gallo, the Centers for Disease Control director is David Satcher, who invited me down recently to the CDC.
Good.
Oh, I refuse to go unless he pays more than lip service to the issues, and I've told him that.
Right.
Basically, the CDC actually, as well as the FDA and Merck Sharp and Dohme, together, were intimately involved in developing that vaccine that most plausibly brought AIDS to the world, that 1974 experimental hepatitis B vaccine, which I didn't tell you. Besides Willowbrook State School mentally retarded children, they used gay men in New York City and blacks in Central Africa.
And Los Angeles, wasn't there the pilot study in San Francisco?
It came a little later.
A little later,
See,
2
that
years.
yeah, that's exactly right. 76, 77, then they started in
who was that guy in charge of the New
78.
York blood bank? Smooznoff or something that was in...
Shmunis, yes.
Shmunis. Yeah, he was just brought in, wasn't he?
Yeah, there is a story about Shmunis. He plays a role in the later hepatitis B studies.
Right.
But really, I think he was kind of a character that people, again, disinformation, wanted to pin the blame. And he's not really to have the blame pinned on him. He was a player, but he wasn't the major player.
But didn't they do that study? That's what I'm understanding, is that they only had promiscuous male homosexuals. Now, that's what's odd. It's like having the women for these vaccines down in these Central American countries, that one vaccine where they're doing multiple tetanus shots. Why only women? And why only homosexuals that are promiscuous? I don't have to be a conspiracy theorist. I'm just asking, why would you only have these people in a hepatitis study?
Well, allegedly, they said that these people were at greater risk for sexually transmitted disease of hepatitis. So they wanted these people, and Merck and Company hired an off-Broadway actress to go out into the community and persuade gay men that they should volunteer for the study as a human service. So, but at any rate, you speak about, like, for example, the tetanus vaccine. People say, and I've always thought tetanus is the most benign of all the vaccines. Not so anymore. You talk about multiple tetanus injections to women. Well, it just came out a couple years ago, research showing that hundreds of thousands of women in the third world, as well as even here in the United States, apparently, were given a tetanus vaccine that contained a hormone called HCG, which caused then the women to become sterile because the body mounted an immune response to their natural HCG, human chorionogonadotrophic hormone, so that when the egg got fertilized, it could not implant into the uterine wall, it could not develop a placenta, and the fetus would die.
It was like being attacked by its own body.
That's exactly right. So why? The question becomes, how did a female human hormone get into a tetanus vaccine other than by intent? And then, why?
Why?
Population control is the only answer. Again, they wanted to get rid of gays, apparently. I mean, I can't, based on the book, now, I show you that it was an accident waiting to happen.
Right.
But I show you also the massive circumstantial evidence that speaks for the intentional theory that is embraced literally by 2/3 of the African American population.
Yeah, they believe it is. Even on 60 Minutes, they interviewed it, and the majority of them believe it's man-made and it was done intentionally.
Intentionally, exactly. So I literally, in the book Emerging Viruses, AIDS and Ebola, I lay out all of the accidental theory, and it was truly an accident waiting to happen, but I lay out all the massive circumstantial
Correct.
evidence that would argue for intent, and certainly there, as a scientist, as a research scientist,
Right.
with over 100 publications, a third of them being scientific peer review, I presented at the 11th International Conference on AIDS, and as an honest scientist now, without a government agenda, without government funding, I'm telling you, I could not conclude one or the other. I leave it to the readers of the book and hopefully to a congressional investigation, which we're pushing for right now.
Right, and that's the way it should be. It's like the you gave the example of the 69 appropriations. I had myself personally talked to one of the gentlemen who was espousing the Duisburg theory and who was injecting himself with the HIV. I can't remember his name. You may know the gentleman who was doing this around the country.
Yes, I remember him. Wilner, he died recently of a heart attack.
Yeah, well, and I don't know if it's related or not. I won't make the assumption. It could be. However, Wilner, after the conference, I asked him, I said, regardless of whether HIV was created or not, I'd like to know, don't you feel it is important to know what was done in that appropriation, whether it was appropriated, and whether or not they were successful? Because if they didn't create HIV, what did they create? And don't you think we should have knowledge of that? And that's important. And he became somewhat irate and just said, HIV wasn't man-made. I said, that's not what I asked. And so basically, I really got the impression he didn't want to discuss it. And I thought that was sad, because I'm saying, even if you don't believe it, why don't we find out what has been done and has been classified, so we know whether or not they have been successful? We don't need the conspiracy theories. It's already enough out there for us to ask questions.
Yeah.
Now, what about Kissinger? You said there was a certain memorandum or something that was put out which specifically asked for the idea of depopulation because of overpopulation of the world. You want to elaborate maybe?
Sure, I'll be happy to. But one following comment on your
Sure.
statement, which is really very, very accurate. Again, for political action in this area, I would urge people to get in touch with Maxine Waters. I would push it to the highest levels of your state government, the governor's office, bringing David Baltimore in front of a congressional inquiry without a Rockefeller sitting at the top, as I'm going to mention the role of Kissinger-Rockefeller in all of this. I would basically say Gallo should be brought in front of this committee. David Baltimore should be in front of there. Unfortunately, Colby, now deceased, who was very intimately connected with this CIA project, MK Naomi. All of this was done under the top secret CIA's project called MK Naomi.
I've heard of the name. Okay.
Anyway, so folks out there, this is your opportunity to make a difference. I mean, literally, what you need to do is make sure that a congressional investigation happens. And we're also pushing for an independent scientific investigation currently. We're in contact with CDC officials in the process of doing that right now.
Good.
But today, getting back to your question, what about Kissinger's role?
Right.
Undoubtedly. See, this is where the center third of the book, Emerging Viruses, AIDS and Ebola, goes into, is the social political background. No epidemic in the history of the planet has not been associated with some major uprising in social political, change.
Correct, okay.
And so what happened around 1968, 69, 70, that all of a sudden in the early 70s prompted this virus research, this virus development and testing, and then the contaminated vaccines as a result?
Right.
Well, it was very clear. I show you that this Department of Defense appropriations was most plausibly the outcome of Henry Kissinger's order to Melvin Laird. In 1968, when Kissinger took over as National Security Advisor under Richard Nixon, he almost immediately ordered Melvin Laird to do a reassessment of America's biological weapons capabilities. He was looking for alternatives to nuclear weapons. And the documentation in the Frank Church congressional inquiry into this whole illegal operations of the CIA, the storage of bioweapons, they incriminated Kissinger. The buck stopped, in other words, with Kissinger. Kissinger, in fact, it was testified by Richard Helms and Colby. It was expected that the CIA would be prepared for using these viruses as biological weapons in the quote-unquote gray areas of operation wherein, and quote, wherein they did not want the hand of America to show. And that area, again, interestingly enough, was Zaire, Angola, which is where Kissinger established the next great stand against world communism. in 1964, 65, 66. And they set up Mobutu, of course, is in the news. He's just, fled from Zaire. It's just fallen into the rebels' hands. Well, again, all of this I show you in the book, Emerging Viruses, AIDS and Ebola, was set up by the Nixon administration, and it's absolutely a horrifying story. Now, with regard to population control, again,
Right.
it was Henry Kissinger, who, by the way, how he got to this position of not only ordering the deployment of nuclear weapons around the world, but also the development of these types of immune system ravaging microorganisms for germ
Right.
warfare, was through his association with Nelson Rockefeller, who made Kissinger the Council of Foreign Relations Nuclear Weapons Study Group Director in 1955. Okay, right. So this is how it all fits in. Now, of course, the Rockefellers' connections to the cancer industry, they started the cancer industry, they basically created funded the American Cancer Institute, they created the eugenics movement, which is the racial differences, that led to the racial hygiene laws in the United States, and then, of course, the Hitlers. Rockefellers funded Hitler's rise,
Right.
Rockefellers funded the commission reports that stated that only pharmaceutical medicine was to be allowed in the United States, the Flexner Report. And so, all of this I go into detail and show you that the Rockefeller-led military medical industrial complex now is a very frightening reality, and that Kissinger in 1971 penned the National Security Memorandum 200, wherein he stated for the first time that third world populations are the #1 risk to the United States national security interests.
And they must be reduced.
And specifically the nations that he stated needed to be targeted for population reduction are among the highest nations of HIV/AIDS today.
Isn't that something? Now, right now in this taping, we're right at the end, so I want to continue in part 2, so I want to thank you.
Well, my pleasure, John. Thanks for inviting me. I look
Great.
forward to the second part.
Sure, this will be excellent. So, it's been Imagine, AIDS and Ebola are man-made. Now, before you make your own opinion on whether you think this is a conspiracy or not, I advise you, please get the book that Dr. Horowitz has written, because once you read the research, it all is put in there, and I bought it myself because I wanted to get information and learn and see the documentation and so forth. And all the documentation is there, and down at the library you can find much of it yourself. So please do that first, and then make up your opinion, and then take action so something can be done. Thank you. This has been Imagine.